I would like to ask Professor Samia Henni if you are ready to start your presentation. We would like to listen to you.
Yeah, hello everyone. Again, thank you very much for having me and for organizing this panel. And to introduce myself, I think it's really important because the panel is organized by the Institute of for Human Rights, and I am not a lawyer. I'm not a political scientist. I am an architect and architectural historian. So I deal or write and teach and research about the histories of the built and destroyed and imagined environments. I prefer not to call it architecture, but really to include the destroyed and imagined environment as well. And I teach in an architecture school. So what I will be presenting today is going to be very visual. I do work with images, with visuals, so audiovisual documents and also texts. And I will try to focus in the next 20, 25 minutes on this events on what I call colonial toxicity. So it's a research project that started a few years ago, and it unfolded in three forms of publicness, in three ways of making this still until today secret, or what the French army deemed secret. So the archives, the institutional archive, the military and colonial archives are classified until today. So this research project attempted to create a body of evidence, of knowledge, and that's what I will share with you today. So I'm just trying to see how I can, because I cannot see now the time, but I can see it here. Okay. So I will present the three forms of publicness: the translation, the exhibition, the publication. Before doing this, I will, and now I'm not moving forward. Okay, that's very bad. Okay. So now it works. Perfect. My apologies. Yeah,
No
I'm not
worries.
always familiar with the. Yeah, so as I was mentioning, the official archives, so document that are somehow recording, or document that around the French nuclear weapons testing program in the Sahara that happened between 1960 and 1966 are still classified today. They were supposed to be open to the public in 2020, and unfortunately it didn't happen. This is a picture of one of the signs that were present on Regen and Ineker, one of the two sites. This is an image of the 1960s, and where somehow the secrecy of those events was in place, and unfortunately still in place today. And as I mentioned, they were supposed to happen in 2020. And when I started this research, I expected that I would have access to those archives, and it didn't happen. So in 2020, I was faced with this decision: what should I do? Keep doing this work or stop? As many colleagues, were saying, if you don't have access to archives, you cannot work on this topic. And I think I decided to do really the opposite, to continue doing this research and to try to find other ways of documenting, rehearsing, and try to find as many evidence as possible. So before showing the three forms that this research took, I will give you the context of what I am referring to. So between 1960 and 1966, when Algeria was still under French colonial rule, the French regime, maybe for those who are not familiar, France colonized in 1830, and the War of Independence, or the Algerian Revolution, started in 1954 and ended in 1962. And the very first nuclear bomb was detonated in February 1960. So this was during the Algerian Revolution, or the Algerian War of Independence, that was between 1954 and 1962. This means that the French continued to detonate their nuclear weapons in the Sahara, in Ineker, after the independence of Algeria. So between 1962 in 1966. This was because the French promised the Algerian government that they would test or detonate the nuclear weapons under the ground in a mountain called Tenefilla, and therefore they would not contaminate the area. Unfortunately, out of 13 nuclear bombs, 11 were not contained, so the area was contaminated. So the French choose this area or this Sahara, as you know, the US did as well in New Mexico and Nevada, and the UK in the deserts in Australia. So this is a sort of colonial tradition of using the territory of the desert as a firing field. And the platitude or the colonial platitude was that deserts are empty, and we all know that deserts are not empty, are full of human and non-human and more than human lives. That's what we also try to do in the book that I edited, Deserts Are Not Empty. So between 1960 and 1966, the French built two sites or two centers, one in Regen and one in Inequality. They also built underground nuclear laboratories or laboratories for the nuclear program. That's also why I'm interested in this topic. As I said, I'm an architecture historian, so I'm very much interested in the built, destroyed, and imagined environment. And here, as you will see in a minute, there are a number of destroyed environments and contaminated environments that the French left after 1966, when they moved their nuclear activities and nuclear weapons testing in the Pacific Ocean, so between 1966 and 1996, so another colony in the Pacific Ocean as well. Here you can see, this is also part of the documentation that I worked on to try to collect as many information or as much evidence as possible. So these are two maps that show the exact location of the four atmospheric bombs that were detonated between 1960 and 1961, and the 13 underground nuclear bombs that were detonated between 1961 and 1966. And you can see here that the names of the atmospheric nuclear bombs were gerbois, so they were named after a Saharan rodent. We have the gerboise bleu, blanc, rouge, and vert, so the three colors of the French flag, and maybe the vert, so the green one, was referring maybe to the Algerian flag. And we have the 13 underground nuclear bombs. They were all named after gemstones, and that's a bit of euphemism or a bit of perversity, let's say, knowing that nuclear weapons or nuclear activity would transform the stone and the soil of the Sahara. So I also contacted a number of artists and filmmakers. Pictures or photographs made by Bruno Hajih, a French Algerian photographer who lived or moved or traveled in the Sahara. And you can see here we have wastes and kinds of ruins or remains of buildings. Or in the case of the underground laboratories, they were all supposed to be sealed off and closed. And unfortunately, the crew of the filmmaker Arabi Ben Shiha, Algerian filmmaker Arabi Ben Shiha, they were all able to enter into these tunnels, into these underground laboratories. So some witnesses say that these laboratories were also visited by Saharan people, and some of the radioactive matters and metals were also used to build their own houses. So we can also see from this contemporary photography, so photographies really from a few years ago, the existence still of the concrete or reinforced concrete bunkers that were used to evaluate and measure the radioactivity that was produced. There are also some abandoned but still existing centers and buildings. We all know that the nuclear states, they are supposed to or expected to clean the area, decontaminate the area, whatever that means. Of course, we know that it's very difficult to or impossible to decontaminate an area, but at least they are expected to dismantle the buildings that served for the testing, but that are also radioactive. We know that all these buildings, they were exposed to radioactive clouds, and they are still today standing. What's also really important to for me was to remember or to think of is the circulation of radioactivity. There are every year around February and March sandstorms. So these radioactive particles of the sand, they are circulating in the Sahara, in Africa, but also in Europe and around the world. And so this beautiful ochre skies and these orange skies that every year are published, or the photographs of this of these skies are published and celebrated. And scientists say that some of the particles are radioactive, but this radioactivity, it's too low to damage the health of the people who will be exposed to it. Not sure about this, to be very honest. But this somehow, the circulation of this radioactivity allows us to say that this is really not only a very local issue. This is about the international community. And I'm thinking right now on the decontamination and the dignity of the Saharan people. They are still living in these areas or around these areas that are radioactive. I'm also thinking of French veterans, since the victims are both. And again, not only those two, but also Saharan people, so people living around the sites as well in other African countries. So what I tried to do in the last few years was to try to collect as much evidence and as much information as possible, videos, films, satellite images, photographs, and also witnesses, and to try to find forms or different forms to make this as accessible as possible, but also as public as possible. I did say that I'm a historian, that I do write books, but I also make exhibitions. So for me, exhibitions are also a form of research and a form of writing and of exposing these kinds of events. So when I was invited a few years ago by If I Can Dance, I Don't Want to Be Part of Your Revolution, which is a art center foundation based in Amsterdam. They were working on their biennial Bodies and Technologies. They invited me to be one of the researchers. I proposed working on this and to try to find a way of internationalizing or making these events and this colonial toxicity as public as possible. So I proposed to think or work on these three forms of publicness, these three forms of exposure. So the very first one was this the translation of victims, of witnesses of nuclear victims or nuclear survivors who were living in the Sahara or in France. So those who worked for the French army or those who built the centers, but also the people who live today, until today, in Rgen and Inekker, and who talked and wrote about their own experience, their own diseases, their own memories, what they went through. We invited around 20 colleagues from around the world, and we provided them with either witnesses in Amazigh and Arabic or in French, and we asked them to translate them into English so that we could publish these witnesses on a platform, on an online platform, and they can all be accessible to other associations or lawyers or other victims or researchers, students, professors, whoever is interested in this topic. And it's really important for us because that was before the exhibition and before the book. And we tried really to make them as accessible as possible, but also to try to provide audiences with human experiences so that they understand the gravity, the scale, the volume of the contamination and of the creation of that radioactivity by France in the Algerian Sahara. So you can here see the link to, or the address, the web address to this platform that's still being, it's is in use. And I know that there are filmmakers who are now, and students as well, who are working on this. And I think this was really, really the idea behind it, is to make it accessible to others, and hopefully other people will continue doing the work. The second iteration, or the second form of publicness that I tried, or we tried to think of, was this exhibition called Performing Colonial Toxicity, that started in Amsterdam at Framer Frames in 2023, and it was designed as a traveling exhibition, as a nomadic exhibition. And the idea was that we could show it in as many places as possible, specifically in the Western world, so that we really try to put pressure on the international community, but also on the French community, to decontaminate, to implement the law that exists about the nuclear states. In this exhibition, we designed it in a way that it can travel. We had an audio, so sound, and we created these kinds, or these sorts of panels, or I call them stations. They are made of A4 paper, so if the institution that would like to host this exhibition has the means to pay for the transportation of the boxes of this A4 paper, we would send them after this exhibition. If not, we could always send the PDF of each of the station, or some of the station that can be shown in other places, and they could print them with an like a A4, so it's really, really basic, a color printer, and they could assemble them and they could reproduce them very easily. These kind of stations have or are or have, yes, a topic. I mean, each of them, you see justice on the right-hand side. We see atmospheric bombs, exposure, again base below ground, and Tenefella Mountain. So each of these stations have two faces, and each of the sites include either historical or contemporary photographs, stills from videos, satellite images, maps, newspaper articles, but also they serve, as you can see here, as a background to project the landscape, so contemporary videos of the landscape, of this radioactive landscape, but they also include interviews with experts from around the world who can teach us about what radioactivity is, what an archive might be, and how, for example, in the case of the activists like Patrice Bouvray, who is the co-founder of the Observatoire des Armements, which is a NGO based in Lyon, who somehow fought for 10 years to make the French acknowledge the status, legally acknowledge the status of nuclear victims. So each of them, they tell us, or they tell the audience and the visitors about their own experience. And it's really important also to make visitors watch and see the current conditions. This is also to disobey to what the French are saying, to the French narrative that they dismantled all the infrastructure. There is really nothing to see there. And here we can absolutely see quite the opposite. We can see that still in Regain there are a number of, as you can see right now, of infrastructure, of towers, of buildings, of radioactive matters that are still circulating and still present in the Sahara. What was also really important was to try to educate ourselves. So and to try to think not only about the radio activity that was created in the Sahara, but also to think about other Western nations, as it was mentioned at the beginning. Those who detonated weapons are here to say who, are here to teach us somehow or to decide on the fate of other countries. So this is also somehow was for us a opportunity to listen to the criticism also of this kind of approach, and to either historians, like in the case of Gabrielle Hecht, who is an expert on the nuclear energy, French nuclear energy, and she speaks also about uranium in that's being extracted in Niger, for example, or Arabi bin Shiha, who tells us about the process of getting the authorizations, yes, from the Algerian government, since these sites are still military zones. It was also really important to try to think of the language we use. In the case of the US, they named the trinitite, which is a fused sand, a very radioactive matter that was created due to the heat and the blast of a Trinity bomb that was detonated in the deserts of New Mexico. In the case of France, there was no effort, or no scientists or no one named all these radioactive matters that are still there. You can see it here on this Jerboa site. This is the name that I'm suggesting. Jerboa is the name of the bomb, and the site can be the site or also like a parasite. So we have on the top this moment of the 1960 of the detonation of the bomb, and then the creation of this huge fused sand on the soil of the Sahara that is still there, as you can see in this Google Earth image from really few years ago when I did this exhibition, so in 2023, and you can see that it's still there. And so here is really also about an invitation to think of the language we use or we don't use, and the witnesses
Sorry to
that I shared.
interrupt you.
Sure,
Yeah, I would appreciate if you wrap it in like 1 minute, please.
sure, absolutely,
Thank you.
of course. So the witnesses that I showed at the beginning were also included in this exhibition, so that the visitors can read by themselves the violence that they were subjected to. And to really finish this presentation, we thought that the witnesses absolutely are very important. They are online. The exhibition can travel from city to city. So it started in Amsterdam, it continued to Zurich, London, Paris, Berlin, and it will continue to Ottawa and Montreal in a few months. And to really finish this series of exposures and making this colonial toxicity public, we created this repository of archives where other people can have access to satellite images, so to photographs, to stills from videos and films, but also to private archives and private photographs that many donors, victims, again in Algeria, in the Sahara, but also in France, offered and gave to us, so that we could compile this series of documents, and other researchers and other associations and can keep doing the work and can really use this as an evidence of the French nuclear weapons program in the Sahara. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thanks so much for the very insightful presentation. I was fascinated by the information and the input that you shared with us. It's amazing, like the way you called it. I mean, the way it's called in the research, colonial toxicity, and how the colonial language is used, talking about the nuclear issue by the very states that have actually used the nuclear um, weapon as a means against nations, against the natural resources and the people of the lands that they have colonized. Thank you very much. And it was very interesting. I hope the same sort of exhibitions and will be shared here so that more people will know about the colonial history of what France, in particular, as you addressed, has done with regards to nuclear contamination of other nations' lands. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.